giant fans. The stalemate with Birais had proven to be a formidable challenge, but President Ruda, ever the master strategist, remained undeterred in his pursuit of victory for the guerrillist cause. Faced with the unyielding resistance of Birais' forces and the fortified defenses of Kazan, Ruda knew that conventional warfare would not suffice to break the deadlock. Thus, he devised a new strategy, one as unconventional as it was audacious, with the potential to turn the tide of battle in his favor. In the quiet of his command chamber, Ruda outlined his plan to his most trusted military engineers. He ordered the design and construction of 10 high-capacity giant fans, each capable of generating powerful gusts of wind. These fans, Ruda envisioned, would be arranged in a bow shape and strategically placed on guerrillas-controlled territory, facing the enemy. It was an idea that bordered on the absurd, yet Ruda's mind was as sharp as a sword, cutting through the complexities of warfare with a clarity that few could match. As the relentless fighting continued, the sounds of gunfire and explosions echoing across the war-torn landscape, the engineers worked tirelessly to bring Ruda's vision to life. The giant fans were constructed with precision and care, each one a testament to the ingenuity and resourcefulness of the guerrillist war machine. Once completed, the fans were positioned along the front lines, their massive blades ready to unleash a powerful breeze toward the enemy. With everything in place, Ruda set his plan in motion. Ester rabbits, injected with the deadly astroxin, were released in front of the fans. As the blades began to turn, the wind picked up, creating a strong breeze that pushed the rabbits toward the enemy lines. The gusts, carefully calculated by Ruda and his engineers, guided the rabbits' movements, driving them forward with increasing speed. Perceiving the gusting wind as a threat, the rabbits instinctively sprinted toward the perceived safety of the Birais' defenses. The sight that greeted the Birais soldiers was nothing short of bizarre. Thousands of rabbits, seemingly driven by an unseen force, raced toward their lines with astonishing speed, covering over 2 kilometers in just over 10 minutes. The Birais guards, initially puzzled by the strange phenomenon, were soon gripped by a sense of unease. The sight of the charging rabbits stirred fear and confusion among the ranks. Were these creatures a harmless curiosity, or had the guerrillists devised some new and deadly trick? Unsure of how to react, the Birais soldiers hesitated. Their instincts, honed by months of brutal warfare, warned them to be cautious, but hunger gnawed at their bellies, and the temptation to capture the rabbits for food was strong. As they debated their next move, the rabbits continued their relentless advance, driven forward by the unyielding force of the wind. Reports of the strange occurrence quickly reached General Blura, the seasoned leader of Birais' forces. With the weight of his nation's fate resting on his shoulders, Blura immediately recognized the potential danger posed by the rabbits. His mind raced through the possibilities. Was this a guerrilla's trap, an attempt to weaken his forces with a hidden threat? Or were the rabbits merely a distraction, a means of sowing chaos among his ranks? Erring on the side of caution, General Blura issued an order to refrain from consuming the rabbits until a thorough investigation could be conducted. The soldiers, though disappointed, complied with the order, knowing that their survival depended on their discipline and vigilance. For a moment, it seemed that Ruda's plan had failed. The element of surprise had been lost, and the rabbits, now corralled by the Birais soldiers, posed no immediate threat. Victory once again seemed elusive, slipping through Ruda's grasp like sand through his fingers. But as history has shown time and time again, the unpredictability of life often brings surprising turns of fate. Ruda, ever the tactician, had anticipated the possibility of failure and had prepared contingencies. Even as the rabbits were captured and detained, the real danger lurked within. Primixtix, the toxin that would wreak havoc on the Birais forces, was already at work, its effects slow to manifest but deadly in their inevitability. As the winds of change swept across the war-torn landscape, Ruda stood at the forefront, ready to seize the moment and lead his forces to victory. The rabbits, though seemingly neutralized, were still carriers of a deadly payload, one that would silently infiltrate the Birais ranks and weaken their resolve from within. In the days that followed, as the rabbits were brought into Birais camps and the soldiers debated their fate, the stage was set for the final act of Ruda's gambit. The silent, insidious effects of primixtics would soon take hold, and the Birais forces would find themselves fighting an enemy they could not see or combat. As the countdown to the toxin's full effect began, the guerrillist forces braced themselves for the decisive moment. The battle for Kazan was far from over, but the tides were turning in Ruta's favor. The wind, once a symbol of change, had become an instrument of war, carrying with it the seeds of victory. The stage was set for a showdown that would determine the course of history, a battle where unconventional strategies and silent weapons would prove just as deadly as the roar of cannons and the clash of swords. In this final chapter of the war, it was Ruta's ingenuity and the winds of deception that would shape the destiny of nations. The scent of deception. As the aroma of grilled Esther rabbit meat wafted through the air, it carried with it the promise of a temporary reprieve from the harsh realities of war. For the soldiers of Birais, weary from months of relentless conflict, the sight and smell of the plump rabbits triggered memories of peaceful holidays and family gatherings, a stark contrast to the chaos and devastation that now surrounded them. In that moment, they yearned for the return of such serene times, for an end to the endless cycle of violence and bloodshed that had engulfed their nation. General Blura, a seasoned warrior with a deep understanding of the human psyche, keenly observed the subtle shifts in his soldiers' emotions. The hunger and fatigue that had accumulated over the grueling months of warfare were now etched on their faces, their fighting spirit waning with each passing day. Concerned about the well-being of his troops, Blura knew that he needed to take action to address their declining morale before it further undermined their effectiveness on the battlefield. The tantalizing scent of grilled Esther rabbit meat, a rare delicacy, wafted through the camp, tempting the soldiers with the promise of a feast that could temporarily lift their spirits. However, General Blura, ever cautious and wary of the guerrillists' cunning, decided to investigate the safety of the rabbits before allowing his troops to partake in the unexpected bounty. He summoned the military doctors under his command and ordered them to conduct a thorough examination of the Esther rabbits. The doctors meticulously tested the rabbits for any signs of toxins or hidden dangers, aware that the guerrillists were known for their ruthless and unconventional tactics. After several days of rigorous testing, they delivered their verdict to General Blura. The rabbits were safe for consumption and bore no hidden threats. Relieved by the doctor's findings, but still cautious, Blura contemplated the situation carefully. He speculated that the guerrillists might be attempting to win the hearts and minds of the Birais people by offering them a taste of the delicacies they so dearly missed. Such a move would be consistent with the guerrillist strategy of psychological warfare, aimed at weakening the resolve of their enemies through manipulation and subterfuge. Despite his reservations, Blura recognized that his soldiers were in desperate need of a morale boost. The grueling conditions of the battlefield had taken a toll on their physical and mental well-being, and a moment of respite could restore some of their lost vigor. With that in mind, he made the decision to permit a small group of soldiers, about 10 in number, to indulge in the succulent grilled Esther rabbit meat. It was a calculated risk, but one that he believed was necessary to lift the spirits of his weary troops. As the chosen soldiers gathered around the fire, the atmosphere in the camp shifted. The tantalizing aroma of the grilled rabbit meat filled the air, teasing their senses and stirring memories of happier times. For a brief moment, they allowed themselves to forget the grim reality of the battlefield and bask in the simple pleasure of good food and camaraderie. The soldiers' comrades looked on with a mixture of envy and longing, their mouths watering at the sight of the succulent meat being devoured by the fortunate few. The scene was almost surreal, a rare moment of peace and normalcy in the midst of the relentless chaos of war. But little did they know that this apparent act of goodwill from the guerrillists concealed a more intricate plan, one that would unfold in the days to come. The Esther rabbits, seemingly harmless and delectable, were the carriers of a sinister secret, primixtics, the toxin that had been carefully engineered to target the people of Birais. Though undetectable by the doctor's tests, primixtics would slowly and insidiously begin to take effect, weakening the Birais soldiers from within. As the soldiers enjoyed the delicious taste of roasted rabbit, they unwittingly moved one step closer to the edge of the abyss, where the line between friend and foe became blurred and the true nature of the guerrillists' intentions would be revealed. General Blura, still cautious, had no idea that this seemingly harmless feast would soon set in motion a chain of events that could change the course of the war. For the moment, the Birai soldiers enjoyed their meal, unaware of the dark turn their fates would soon take. The scent of deception was thick in the air, and the stage was set for the next act in the deadly game of cat and mouse between Birais and the guerrillist forces. As the days passed and Primixtix began to work its way through the soldiers' systems, the true implications of the guerrillists' plans would become all too clear, and the battle for Birais would enter a new and dangerous phase. The Feast of Illusions. As the 10 chosen soldiers reveled in the delightful taste of Esther rabbit meat, their enjoyment seemed to stretch into eternity. The succulent flavors brought a temporary reprieve from the persistent hunger that had gripped them, a brief moment of respite amidst the chaos of war. For those precious moments, they were able to forget the horrors of the battlefield and indulge in the simple pleasure of good food. General Blura, ever the vigilant leader, observed the chosen soldiers with a watchful eye. Over the next few days, he detected no adverse effects among the fortunate few, prompting him to extend the privilege to another 100 soldiers. It was a decision made with cautious optimism, a calculated risk taken in the hopes of boosting morale and lifting the spirits of his weary troops. Excitement surged through the camp as soldiers eagerly volunteered to be part of the next group to savor the Esther rabbit feast. The selected individuals, akin to famished tigers, devoured every morsel with unparalleled enthusiasm. The succulent meat, cooked to perfection, melted in their mouths, sending waves of pleasure coursing through their bodies. It was a taste of luxury in the midst of adversity, a brief moment of joy amidst the relentless struggle. However, the joy was short-lived as the limited portions left them yearning for more, their appetites whetted by the tantalizing flavors of the Esther rabbit meat. The empty plates bore witness to the fleeting nature of their delight, leaving behind a collective wish for an endless banquet. Yet, even as they longed for more, the soldiers couldn't help but feel a sense of gratitude for the small reprieve from the hardships of war. For a brief moment, they were able to forget the dangers that lurked beyond the confines of their camp and simply enjoy the taste of victory, however fleeting it may be. 5 days passed, and General Blura continued to monitor the soldiers closely, searching for any signs of illness or weakness. But the men remained strong and unharmed, going about their duties with a renewed sense of vigor. The general, reassured by the lack of negative outcomes, made the decision to extend the feast to the entire army. The news of the feast spread like wildfire through the camp, igniting excitement among the troops. Cheers resounded across the Birais encampment as soldiers gathered to partake in the feast, their spirits lifted by the promise of good food and a brief escape from the harsh realities of war. Those stationed on the front lines, battling in the trenches, yearned for their turn to experience the taste of victory in the form of Esther rabbit meat. But amidst the jubilation, General Blura remained cautious. Though satisfied with the initial outcomes, he chose not to partake in the feast himself, wary of the possibility that hidden dangers lurked beneath the surface. The memories of previous encounters with guerrillist cunning weighed heavily on his mind, reminding him that even the simplest pleasures could be traps laid by a wily enemy. On the opposing front, President Ruda observed the unfolding events with a sense of satisfaction. The plan, hatched in secrecy and executed with precision, was beginning to bear fruit. The Esther rabbits, not the countless soldiers or advanced weaponry, were emerging as the game-changers in the conflict. It was a testament to the power of deception and manipulation, a reminder that victory in war often depended on cunning and strategy rather than brute force alone. As the Esther rabbit meat continued to flow into the Birais camp, Ruda knew that the seeds of doubt and dissent had been sown. With each bite, the soldiers unwittingly consumed the poison that would eventually lead to their downfall. It was a slow and insidious process, but one that would ultimately tip the scales in favor of the guerrillist army. The feast was no mere indulgence, it was a carefully orchestrated maneuver designed to weaken Birais from within. As the soldiers savored the grilled meat, they were blissfully unaware that their enemy's most potent weapon was already at work, undermining their strength and resolve with every bite. As the sun set on another day of conflict, Ruda looked out over the battlefield with a sense of satisfaction. The wheels of fate were turning in his favor, and victory was within reach. All it took was a simple rabbit to change the course of history, proving once again that in the game of war, anything was possible. In the days that followed, as the first signs of weakness began to appear among the Birai soldiers, the true wisdom of Ruda's plan was revealed. The illusory banquet had served its purpose, and the stage was set for the final act in the battle for Birais, a battle that would be won not by swords and guns, but by the cunning intellect of a strategist who understood that the greatest victories were often those won in the shadows. The unseen enemy. As days passed without incident, General Blura found solace in the apparent safety of the soldiers who had enjoyed the Esther rabbit meat. The initial joy and relief at the soldiers' apparent well-being were palpable, offering a fleeting moment of respite amidst the relentless turmoil of war. The taste of victory, however small, seemed to linger in the air, but it was a victory tinged with an unease that Blura couldn't quite shake. As the days wore on, a sense of foreboding began to creep into the camp, a shadow lingering over the weary soldiers. It was on the 13th day that the first signs of trouble emerged. The soldiers who had partaken in the Esther rabbit feast began to show signs of exhaustion and fatigue. At first, these symptoms were dismissed as the inevitable consequences of the relentless battle they had been waging. The men had been pushed to their limits, and fatigue was an expected outcome. But as the hours passed, the symptoms escalated. Cramps, diarrhea, and vomiting soon followed, transforming what had been a simple case of fatigue into something far more sinister. The initial vigor that had followed the feast gave way to profound lethargy, casting a pall over the once jubilant soldiers. The camp, once filled with the sounds of camaraderie and the hum of determined activity, now echoed with groans of discomfort and the shuffling of weary feet. Alarmed by the sudden downturn in the health of his men, General Blura quickly received a report detailing the grim reality of the first group's condition. Blura's initial reaction was one of disbelief. The possibility of a guerrillist plot seemed remote, almost absurd. How could a feast, intended to boost morale, become the instrument of their downfall? Yet, as more soldiers fell ill, he could no longer dismiss the possibility that something was terribly wrong. He sent for the military doctors, hoping for answers. The doctors, after thorough examination, diagnosed the soldiers with a salmonella virus infection, attributing it to unsanitary conditions rather than the rabbit meat itself. Their explanation was logical, even comforting in its simplicity, but it failed to account for the gnawing doubt in Blura's mind. He couldn't shake the feeling that there was more at play, something hidden beneath the surface that eluded their understanding. Confused and desperate for clarity, Blura questioned why the affliction had struck only the first group and not the others. The search for truth led him into a quagmire of uncertainty, compounded by the invisible nature of the adversary they faced. As a soldier, the intricacies of the scientific truth hidden within Esther rabbit meat eluded him. The possibility that the very food meant to sustain his troops could be their undoing was a bitter pill to swallow. Blura's thoughts turned dark as he contemplated the implications. If the infection was indeed the result of a guerrilla's plot, it was a masterstroke of cruelty, a slow, insidious attack that bypassed the defenses of steel and stone to strike at the very heart of his army's strength. The realization filled him with a cold dread, a sense of impending defeat that he struggled to suppress. He sought refuge in the collective heroism of the nation, hoping that their resilience would carry them through the crisis, but the grim reality that Birai's future hung in the balance weighed heavily on his shoulders. In the days that followed, the second group of 100 soldiers began to exhibit symptoms similar to those of the first group. The initial signs were subtle: fatigue, loss of appetite, a general malaise that could be easily overlooked in the chaos of war. But soon, the symptoms worsened, spreading through the camp like a plague. Diarrhea, vomiting, and cramps became the new norm, leaving the soldiers weak and vulnerable. Blura's anger and frustration grew as he grappled with an unseen, minuscule adversary that now threatened Birai's fate. The insidious nature of the infection, spreading silently and stealthily through the ranks of his army, filled him with a sense of helplessness and frustration. It was a cruel twist of fate, a betrayal by an enemy that lurked in the shadows, invisible yet undeniably potent. As the number of infected soldiers continued to rise, Blura's resolve was tested like never before. Every cough, every groan of pain, served as a painful reminder of the relentless march of death that now stalked the corridors of his camp. Yet, amidst the despair and uncertainty, Blura refused to succumb to hopelessness. He was a soldier, a leader, and he would fight to the bitter end to defend his nation and its people. With each passing day, the situation grew increasingly dire, with the infection spreading like wildfire through the ranks of his army. Despite his best efforts to contain the outbreak, Blura found himself overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the crisis. It was a battle unlike any he had faced before, a war against an invisible enemy that threatened to tear his army apart from within. Yet, even in the darkest of times, there was still hope. Hope that, somehow, they would find a way to overcome this seemingly insurmountable obstacle. Hope that, in the end, Bir Eyes would emerge victorious, stronger, and more resilient than ever before. For General Blura, this hope was a beacon of light in the midst of the storm, guiding him forward through the darkest of nights. As the days turned into weeks, Blura remained steadfast in his determination to see his nation through this crisis. With each passing day, the toll of the infection grew heavier, yet he refused to yield to despair. He would fight on, for the sake of his people, for the future of Bir Eyes, and for the hope of a better tomorrow. And so, as the battle against the unseen enemy raged on, General Blura stood firm, a beacon of strength and resilience in the face of adversity. Though the road ahead was fraught with challenges and uncertainties, he knew that as long as he had the courage to fight, there would always be hope for a brighter tomorrow. The last stand of Bir Eyes. In the ensuing days, the relentless onslaught of cholera incapacitated almost the entire Bir Eyes army. The once mighty soldiers, renowned for their bravery and resilience, now lay bedridden, their bodies ravaged by the merciless disease. What had begun as a small wave of illness had grown into a full-blown epidemic, sweeping through the ranks like wildfire. The halls of Bir Eyes hospitals, once places of healing and hope, were now filled with the stench of sickness and the sounds of suffering. Doctors, overwhelmed and fatigued, toiled incessantly under the immense pressure of the epidemic, their efforts stretched to the breaking point as they struggled to save as many lives as possible. The shortage of medical professionals only compounded the crisis. Those few who remained standing worked tirelessly, their hands trembling with exhaustion as they administered treatment to the ever-increasing number of patients. Every available space was transformed into a makeshift infirmary, but still, it wasn't enough. The hospitals overflowed with the sick and dying, their moans of agony echoing through the corridors, a haunting symphony of despair. Medical supplies dwindled, and the overworked doctors and nurses found themselves forced to make impossible decisions, who to save and who to let go. It was a brutal reality, one that tore at the hearts of those who had sworn to protect life. Amidst the chaos and tragedy, moments of heartbreak pierced the soul. A doctor, who had spent days without rest, succumbed to the weight of despair, taking his own life in a moment of unbearable anguish. His death sent shockwaves through the medical staff, a stark reminder of the toll that war exacts not only on the body but on the mind and spirit as well. The very people tasked with saving lives were themselves being destroyed by the horrors they witnessed daily. General Blura, witnessing the devastation and despair among his soldiers, harbored a profound sadness in his heart. He had led these men into battle with the promise of victory and glory, only to see them struck down by a silent and invisible enemy. The once proud and defiant army of Bir Eyes now lay broken and defeated, their spirits crushed by the merciless grip of disease. Blura's heart ached for every life lost, every dream shattered. As he surveyed the grim reality unfolding before him, Blura glimpsed the imminent defeat and impending destruction of Bir Eyes. The enemy had not only breached their defenses, but had also dealt a devastating blow to their morale and resolve. For the first time since the war began, Blura found himself grappling with a profound sense of helplessness, unsure of how to stem the tide of despair that threatened to engulf his people. He was a warrior, but this was a battle he could not fight with sword or strategy. On the opposing front, President Ruda reveled in the success of his covert strategy. The plan to introduce the Ester rabbits injected with astraxin had exceeded his wildest expectations, resulting in a widespread outbreak of cholera that had decimated the Bir Eyes army. The silent weapon had done what no conventional attack could, crippled the very heart of Birai's resistance. With their ranks depleted and their morale shattered, the Birai soldiers were now easy prey for the advancing guerrillist forces. Ordering the guerrillist army to launch a vigorous assault, Ruda watched with satisfaction as they penetrated deep into Birai's weakened defenses. The once formidable city of Kazan now lay vulnerable before them, its streets echoing with the sounds of gunfire and explosions as the two sides clashed in a desperate struggle for survival. General Blura, faced with the grim reality of impending defeat, declared a steadfast defense, vowing to fight to the death to protect his homeland. Despite the overwhelming odds stacked against them, the soldiers of Birai refused to surrender. Their heroism and unwavering determination manifested in an increased deployment of mines throughout the capital, Kazan. Blura knew that if they were to fall, they would do so on their own terms, ensuring that the enemy would have nothing to gain from their victory. The number of mines tripled, as Birai aimed to leave their city in ruins. They chose a path of no retreat, embracing death as a testament to their heroic sacrifice and unwavering loyalty to their nation. For Blura and his men, there was no alternative. They would fight until their last breath, even if it meant turning Kazan into a city of ghosts. Two contrasting states unfolded on either side of the front line, one marked by the anticipation of victory and triumph, the other weighed down by the agony of impending failure and defeat. The soldiers of Birai, weakened and dying, still managed to mount a ferocious defense, each mine that exploded under the guerrillist advance a final act of defiance. They knew their fate was sealed, but they refused to give up their homeland without a fight. Such is the harsh reality and nature of war, where the line between life and death, victory and defeat, is often blurred and uncertain. And amidst the chaos and devastation, the true cost of conflict is revealed in the shattered lives and broken dreams of those caught in its merciless grip. As Kazan teetered on the brink, the fate of Birai hung in the balance, a testament to the enduring spirit of a people who would rather die than surrender.